Hi, hello there. Welcome to Basic Device Configuration video demonstration. This video demo is associated with a basic device configuration video lecture. Let's get started. So let me start with creating my topology for this demonstration. All right. So let me start with having a PC here. Okay, so something like, for instance, I have my PC1. Okay, I also need a PC2 here. Okay, so next would be, I'll be needing a switch. Say I'll be using 2960 switch and a router. Say that would be 1941. Okay, so let's say this is my topology here. Okay, so the next thing to do is let me connect these devices using an appropriate cable. Okay, so PC1 to the switch, and then this switch, okay, so to router, and then your router to your PC. Okay, so assuming that this is our topology here. All right, so the next thing to do is let me use my IP address, chosen IP address. Say I'm going to use 192.168.1.0/24 on this side of the network, and say on this side 192.168.2.0/24. All right, now what I'm going to do is to assign the first usable IP on my host. So starting on PC1, okay, so desktop there, IP configuration, first usable IP would be 192.168.1.1. Subnet mask. All right, so my default gateway, I'm going to use the last usable IP, so which is 192.168.1.254. Okay, so close this. On PC2, I'm going to assign the first usable IP on the block, which is 192.168.2.1. All right, so and that would be default gateway would be 192.168.2.254. Okay, so everything is set for an IP address on the hosts. All right, so since this demonstration is dedicated for the basic device configuration of a router and a switch, all right, so let me start my configuration with the switch. Now actually we can configure the switch and the router via the CLI interface integrated on the switch there, but in reality we are not actually doing that. There's no such thing as a CLI, all right, on a switch. So instead we will be using a console. Okay, let's use this console cable or the rollover cable to connect to the switch via the console port going to our device that would configure the switch, and that is via RS232 here. Okay, so same thing, we can configure this router using the CLI here, but then again in the real world we are using a rollover cable connected by a console to configure it on another device, such as a PC in this case via RS232 here. All right, now let me access and start with the switch. Okay, so let me get into the switch there. Okay, so via PC1, okay, so I will be able to access the switch iOS here via the terminal there, and then accept the default settings. All right, so we are now in the iOS. Okay, so the very first thing that we need to do is, of course, to change the host name. So currently the default name is, of course, a switch for a switch and router for a router. So let me change the default name switch to something like S1, for instance. All right, so for instance I'm going to set this, okay, to S1. Okay, so let me just change it. All right, so PC1 here is PC1. All right, and then the switch, okay, so config, let me denote this is S1 here. Okay, so the display name, And this one here, router, is say we name it R1. All right, and then PC2 there. All right, so let's go back to our PC. Okay, again, desktop, terminal. Okay, here. So let's start the configuration on switch. Okay, so let me start with changing the host name. So that would be enable, configure terminal, hostname S1. Okay, so the very first thing that we need to do after changing the host name would be configuring some security settings on the switch. Okay, and let us start that with a configuration of line console. Okay, so line console 0, okay, password Cisco, for instance, and then login. Now, what is the effect of this command on a switch? Okay, so let's see it. Let me exit on this, exit, and then exit. So earlier on, when we get into the iOS, it doesn't prompt us for authentication. It doesn't ask us for a password. Now that we have configured line console 0, so it now prompts us to enter the password. Okay, so that is the effect of the line console configuration on the switch. Same thing with the router. So in this case, our password set is Cisco. All right. So next would be, observe when I press enable here, it doesn't prompt us for a password. Okay, so when we access that, okay, so there is no authentication. And that is the effect of the next demonstration here, which is configuring the enable password. All right, so say enable password class. Okay, now what is the effect of enable password class? Okay, so again, let me exit here. Okay, so this is the line console. Okay, the password was Cisco. All right, so this is now the enable password here. When we type in enable, all right, so it will prompt us for a password. Okay, and our password set was class. So that is the enable password. Okay, now if you want to see the configuration set on the switch, you could go ahead and type in show run. All right, so in here, we can see what we have configured. Okay, the host name and the password is visible in plain text. Okay, now if you want to encrypt this, okay, so we can use the command service password encryption. Okay, the service password encryption will encrypt all the plain text password set on the switch, including the future passwords that would be configured. All right, so in this case, let me do that. So configure terminal, okay, and then type in service password encryption. Okay, now when you type in here, service password encryption, enter, and do show run. Take note, initially, we can visibly check the password and it is class. Now after the service password encryption, let's see that. Okay, so the password is now encrypted on a level 7. Okay, so it is class, okay, in plain text that we have set earlier. Okay, so after the enable or the service password encryption, it is now encrypted on a level 7. Okay, so next would be enable secret. Okay, so what is enable secret? So let me type in here, enable secret. Let's say the password is Sanfran. All right, Sanfran. Enter. Okay, so what is enable secret and how is it different from enable password? So it has the same effect on the switch or on the router. It's just that the enable secret has a higher encryption, which uses level 5 encryption. And it actually disables the enable password once configured on a router or on a switch. Okay, so if you want to see the encryption on the enable secret, so let's type in here show run. Since we're inside the configuration, so let's have do show run here. If you will observe, Okay, so the enable secret here, which is San-Fran, is encrypted, and it has a higher encryption than that of level 7 at level 5. All right, so let's see the effect of the enable secret. So let me exit on this. All right, exit. Okay, so again, this is our line console. All right, and our password here is Cisco. Take note that when we type in enable here, it should be prompted or asked us to enter our password. Enable password, which was set earlier, is not in effect anymore. So the password set was Cisco, and if you will observe, it is not accepted. Okay, so once you have configured an enable secret, it will supersede the configuration of the enable password. All right, and the password set on the enable secret is San-Fran. Okay, so that's the difference between enable password and enable secret. All right, so the next thing to do is to configure the next security, which is for remote access on a switch or a router. Okay, so let's have configure terminal here. That is via line VTY. All right, 0 to 15. Your switch supports 16 virtual lines. That's from 0 to 15. Whereas your router supports 0 to 5, 0 to 4, which has 5 virtual lines. Okay, so for line VTY 0 to 15, let's have password here. Say the password is Cisco. Okay, and then log in. All right, so if you want to see the configuration on the switch, you could have do show run. All right, so that is located on the lower part of this configuration. So line console is encrypted at level 7. Line VTY is also encrypted at level 7. All right, now to demonstrate the effect of the line VTY, we need to set an IP address on the switch. Okay, so that we can remotely access this S1 here. Now, the purpose of assigning an IP address to a switch is just for monitoring purposes or management purposes. Okay, that is remotely done or remotely performed. So remote monitoring is the purpose why we assign an IP address on the switch. So how do we assign an IP address on the switch? So for instance, I'll be using this IP address here, the network address 192.168.1.0. Okay, so by default, Cisco uses VLAN 1. Okay, but we could set other VLANs or interface and assign an IP address to it, something like VLAN 99 for the management of the VLAN. Okay, so we could check the interface here. So something like do show IP interface brief. All right, so if you will observe here, okay, there is a default VLAN there that you could use and assign an IP address to it. So for the router, let me configure it on PC2. Okay, now let me go to PC2 here. All right, so again, terminal, just accept the default values, and then that's it. So the default name is router. So the first thing that we need to do is to change the host name. All right, so let's start with that. So that is enable. All right, configure terminal. Host name, say that is R1. Okay, so we can do the same like what we did with the switch one for the basic device configuration. So host name, let's also configure, for instance, line console 0, right? Password here is Cisco, okay, and then login. Okay, so you also have enable secret. Let's go directly to enable secret. All right, the password or the secret is San-Fran. Okay, and then say line VTY 0 to 4. Okay, password say Cisco, login. Right, so we are done with the basic configuration on the router. Now let us assign an IP address and enable an interface for this topology here. Okay, so let's see what interface is this. Okay, so this is G00 and this one is G01. So let's configure that. Let us assign an IP address to G00 here. So that is interface G0/0. Okay, so IP address 192.168.1.254. The last usable IP was used as the default gateway for the PC and the switch. All right, so subnet mask would be 255.255.255.0. All right, and then no shutdown. Okay, so same thing. Let us assign an IP address and enable the interface G01. So interface G0/1. Right, so IP address 192.168.2.254. 255.255.255.0. All right, and then no shutdown. Okay, so that's it. Now to simulate, okay, we can now simulate Telnet on this router. So let us try to Telnet this router. Okay, so let me go to the desktop, close this. Let's try to access R1 using Telnet. Okay, so to do that, click on the command prompt here. Let's try to ping first if we can reach that default gateway. So take note that the default gateway, okay, so is 192.168.2.254. So ipconfig here, okay, so 192.168.2.254. Let's try to ping that. So ping 192.168.2.254. Okay, so we can reach now R1 from PC2. Okay, and therefore with the configuration of line VTY, okay, so we should have successfully connect to R1 via Telnet. Okay, so take note that in here we configured it with, okay, let me use that CLI configuration here. Okay, show run. Okay, so we have here the line VTY and the password was Cisco. Okay, so let me go to this. Okay, so let me turn this on, the two. All right, so what we're going to do here is let's try to access R1 remotely via PC2. So to do that, you have your Telnet 192.168, right, .2.254. Okay, and it will prompt us for a password. So it will be doing authentication. Okay, so the password set here for line VTY or remote access is Cisco. So let's apply Cisco there. All right, so as you can see, we are now, okay, is on R1. So enable. So there should be enable secret there. All right, so enable secret. Okay, so the password was Sanfran. All right, and that's it. So we have successfully, okay, accessed R1 remotely via Telnet. Okay, now how about on the switch? Okay, now to do that on the switch, so you need to configure a default gateway on the switch. All right, so and how is it? Now let's go to PC1 here. Okay, so take note that we already have assigned an IP address on switch 1. Okay, so let me close this one and try to use the command prompt there. Okay, so ipconfig. Okay, so we should have reached the R1 here. Let's try. So ping 192.168.1.254. All right, so you can ping it, and also you can remotely access it using Telnet. Telnet 192.168, right? .1.254. Okay, and it worked. We've got Cisco here, enable. All right, San Fran, you're there on R1. Okay, so exit. All right, so let us configure, okay, an IP address on switch 1. Okay, so something like, say, do show IP int brief. Okay, so we have here a default VLAN, so which is VLAN 1 that we can use, okay, and assign an IP address to it, and use this as an interface to the switch so that we can remotely manage switch 1 or S1. So let's do that. So to do that, so you've got interface VLAN 1. Okay, so let us assign an IP address to it. So say IP address, okay, so 192.168.1.2, for instance. You've got 255.255.255.0. All right, so it is administratively down, so let's enable it. No shutdown. Okay, so let's check that. So do show IP int brief. So we should be seeing there VLAN 1. Okay, now that we have assigned an IP address to the switch, so we can now remotely access it. All right, so let's try to access it first within the same network. Okay, and to do that, okay, let's go to PC1 here. Okay, so let's try to access, okay, our 192.168.1.2. Okay, and it says here, okay, it asks us for a password. So the switch was configured with line VTY password of Cisco. All right, so this is now switch 1, if you will observe. Enable, and then you've got San Fran there. All right, so we are into switch 1. Okay, so that's Telnet. You can remotely access the switch, okay, or any device, would it be a router also, on the same network. Okay, but if we are going to try to access switch 1, okay, on PC2, that would be impossible because PC2 here is located on 2.0 network, while our switch is located on 1.0 network. So you have to do something, okay, so to access this switch on PC2. Let's try to access switch 1 on PC2 without doing further configuration. Okay, so command prompt here. So let's try to access that via Telnet. Okay, so 192.168. Say 1.2. Okay, so if you will observe here, okay, so Telnet are trying to connect. Okay, and then the connection is timed out. Remote host not responding. So that is because we need to configure S1 here to have a default gateway, since we are accessing it remotely from 2.0 network. So let's do that. So to assign a default gateway on the switch, okay, so that is, okay, so IP and then default, okay, default gateway, and then say 192.168.1.254. So that is the same default gateway used by PC1 here, since switch is also part of the 192.168.1.0 network. Okay, so let's see that. Okay, so show run, since we're inside the configuration, so do show run here. All right, so where is it? You've got the default gateway. So let's try to access that here. Okay, start her up. Okay, so it now allows us, okay, so to remotely access switch 1 from the remote network. So that's the use of setting an IP default gateway on a switch. Okay, if you want to remotely access switch, or specifically S1 here, from other network, we need to set the default gateway. So let's get in. Okay, so the password was Cisco. Okay, the switch one already. And then our password for enable secret. So we are now on switch one. And we have successfully accessed it via other network. Why there is a need for SSH when you could have Telnet and vice versa? So basically SSH or secure shell, okay, so that is more secure than Telnet. So let's try to configure an SSH access on the switch. All right. All right. So we are live in 3, 2, 1, record. Okay. So on this video demo, okay, so I'm going to show you how to configure an SSH, okay, on switch 1 and R1. Okay. So SSH is the counterpart of Telnet. It's just that Telnet is not that secure compared to SSH. Okay. Now let me give you some overview about SSH. Okay. So SSH or secure shell, just like Telnet, enables a user to access a remote device and manage it remotely. However, with SSH, all data transmitted over the network, including username and passwords, is encrypted and secure from eavesdropping. So SSH is a client-server protocol. So with SSH client and SSH server. So the client machine, such as a PC, okay, establishes a connection to the SSH server running on the remote device, such as switch here or S1 or a router. So once the connection has been established, a network admin can execute commands on the remote device. Okay. Now let me show you how to configure SSH on this given topology. So let's start with the switch here. Okay. So on the switch, let's click this. Since we already have basic configuration on this switch, so the next thing to do is let's just set the domain name, which is necessary on configuring the SSH. Okay, so actually the host name is necessary, but we already have set it to S1. So let's set, okay, so the domain name. So to do that, the command would be IP domain name. Say the domain name is cisco.com. All right. So it is set already. So both the host name, okay, and the domain name will be used in the processing of generating an encryption key. That is why the host name and the domain name is a must on the configuration of the SSH. All right. So after setting the host name and after setting the domain name, the next thing to do is to generate an encryption keys for securing the session, okay, using the command crypto key generate SSH or RSA, sorry. Okay, so we could generate that keys using the command crypto, okay, key generate RSA. Oh, it's not supported here. Oh, typo. It should be crypto. Okay. Crypto key generate RSA. All right. So you will be asked how many bits, okay, in the modulus will be used. So the default here is 512. Since I'll be using, okay, SSH version 2, let me set it to 1024 here. All right. So generating the 1024-bit RSA keys, this will be not exportable. Okay. So after that, so the next thing is we need to enable or set an enable password. We already have set an enable secret to this. Okay. And the next thing to do is we need to set the username and the password for local login. Now to do that, okay, so say I have here username, okay, say the username is admin, all right, password, say admin also. Okay, so the password will have to be provided before you can access the CLI, okay, of the router when using SSH. All right, so finally, we need to set the version. So let me use IPSSH version 2 here. So IPSSH, okay, version 2. All right, so we're set. So the next thing to do here is we need to go to the line VTY that we have configured earlier and try to configure the SSH there. So let's get into it. So that is line VTY, okay, 0 to 15. Okay, so transport input SSH. Okay, and then log in local. That's all for the configuration. Okay, so we're set. Let's check that on our configuration. So do show run here. So that's on the lower part. So we have here line VTY. Okay, you also have here transport input SSH. All right, so let's test this. Okay, so let's go to PC1 here. Okay, command prompt, and let us try to access the S1 or switch 1 using SSH. Earlier on, okay, so from the demonstration, you have seen that we were able to access it via Telnet. Okay, now is Telnet enabled after configuring SSH? Let's check that. All right, so if you will observe here, connection to 192.168.1.2 closed by foreign hosts. So once you have configured an SSH, this will disable Telnet functionality on the network. So remember that SSH is much secure than that of Telnet. All right, so let's try to access using SSH here. So to do that, the command would be SSH -L. Okay, the username was admin. All right, and then the IP address, which is 192.168.1.2. Okay, so if you will observe, it prompted us for a password, and the password is admin. Okay, so take note, we have username admin, password admin. All right, so enable. The password here is Sanfran, the enable secret set earlier on. Okay, so we have successfully accessed switch 1 remotely from PC1, okay, using SSH. And take note that these two hosts here, all right, or these two end nodes here are located on 1.0. So let's try to access S1 using SSH from the PC2, which is on the remote network. Let me close this. All right, so let me go to PC2 here. All right, and let's try to access that. Exit. So this is currently connected using Telnet here. Now let's redo that. Again, you will be refused, okay, so by the foreign host. All right, let's use SSH -L, okay, and then admin, the IP address, which is 192.168.1.2. All right, password is also admin. Okay, so enable Sanfran. All right, so we have successfully connected to switch 1. All right, so we can also configure SSH on the router. So it's the same configuration. All right, so let's do that on the router also. Okay, so let's go to the router here. Okay, So let me just use the CLI here. Okay, so password Cisco enable. Okay, and then this one is San Fran here. All right. So again, the procedures for configuring the SSH is first, you need the host name. So we are done setting the host name. Okay, so the next thing is to define the domain name. So we have used cisco.com as our domain name. So let's do that. Configure terminal here. Okay, so IP domain name cisco.com. Okay, so again, the host name and the domain name will be used in the process of generating the encryption keys. All right, so that's why it's a must. All right, now let us generate the encryption key like what we did on the switch. So again, the command here is crypto, okay, key generate RSA. Okay, so let me use 1024 instead. Okay, so after that, the next thing to do is to enable the password, and we already did, right? So after that, we need to set the username and the password for local login. So to do that, so that would be username, for instance, admin. Okay, the password is also admin. All right. So next is, let's set the version. So that would be IPSSH version 2. Okay. So afterwards, we need to set it on the line VTY. Okay. So for instance, I have here line VTY 0 to 4. Okay. Next would be transport input SSH. Okay, login local. All right, and then we're done. Let's try to access that via PC2. Okay, can we access it now here on PC2? On prompt, let's see. Okay, so exit here on switch 1. All right, so something like SSH -L. Okay, so that is admin. The IP address is 192.168.2.254. Okay, so it prompted us for a password. So that is admin. All right, so enable. So as you can see, we are now on R1. Okay, and then San Fran. That's it. All right, so that's how easy it is to configure SSH both on the switch and on the router. All right, so what's the next thing to do here? So let me demonstrate to you how to verify directly connected networks. Okay, so let's go on to the router. So let me close this and let me access the router again using the terminal here. All right, so first let's see the configuration, okay, on the router. So that is the same thing with the switch. So again, that is show run. All right, so you could have show run here to show the configuration set or made on the router. Okay, so also you could have something like show IP interface brief. Okay, so this would display the available interfaces on the router, okay, including the IP address and the status of the interface. So something like up and up. Okay, so also another command that you can use to verify directly connected networks would be show IP route here. Okay, so this is only for IPv4. Okay, you could do the same on IPv6. Okay, so in here, what does it mean if you have the show IP route? So show IP route is a command used to display the routing table. And right now, so what we have only here are directly connected networks. So you can see here, you have C and L. Okay, now C here means directly connected networks. Okay, so take note that based on our topology here, R1, okay, is connected to two different subnets. So those are 192.168.1.0, okay, which is this one here. All right, that is connected via gigabit Ethernet 00, and another one is 192.168.2.0 that is connected via gigabit Ethernet 01. So C denotes a directly connected networks on the router. Okay, now how about L? So what is L for? L is basically local. Okay, it denotes the IP address configured on the local interface. So take note that we have configured here 192.168.1.254 on this interface, which is gigabit Ethernet 00 here. Okay, and also the other L there is the IP address configured on gigabit Ethernet 01, which is 192.168.2.254. Okay, and the subnet mask would basically is /32 there. All right, so again, you have the same, okay, on IPv6. So that ends up my video demo. Thank you very much for listening and watching. Have a great day.